What's up everyone, I'm Eldritch, and we're going to take a look at the other two pre-order bundles for World of Warships. Alright, let's take a look at these ships, shall we? First off, we have the Sims, a Tier 7 American destroyer, which can of course most effectively be compared to the aaaaand, another Tier 7 American destroyer. The Sims and the aaaaand are very similar in both hit points and armor. The aaaaand has the slight upper hand with 300 more hit points and a little bit more armor, but once again, destroyers, especially at this tier, armor just doesn't really matter, neither do hit points. At Tier 7, battleships already do enough damage to kill a Tier 7 destroyer with one shell. Not one salvo, one shell. So having 300 more hit points is really almost never going to make a huge difference. In terms of maneuverability, the Sims absolutely wins out in all categories. It is faster, it turns quicker, and it shifts the rudder quicker, which makes it just more nippy, and you can maneuver around and dodge incoming fire and fire back at the enemy much better than the aaaaand can. In concealment, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Surface detectability is better for the Sims, and the air detectability is better for the aaaaand, but in the end they're very similar, and I wouldn't really say that either one of them have the upper hand in this category. In terms of guns, they are relatively equal. The Sims definitely has the much better range. It's a similar story to how the Gremiachi works, in that you have 13 kilometers range, which is just so much better than the slightly under 12 kilometers range of the aaaaand, and way better than, for example, the Tier 7 Japanese destroyers. And the comparison to the Gremiachi is actually very valid, because the Sims, in the end, does perform very similar to the Gremiachi. Because of how long-ranged your guns are, you can consistently fire at the enemy without them really detecting you, as long as you stay at as close to max range as you can. So you can really make use of your guns. As always, American ships have legendary turret traverse, and the Sims is no exception. The Sims actually even has a much better turret traverse than the average American ship, so it's just ridiculous. A 5.3 second turret traverse makes this thing just amazing. You can always point your guns at the enemy. There's never a situation where you just feel like you can't engage them or anything like that. When it comes to rate of fire and accuracy, the Sims definitely loses out to the aaaaand. The aaaaand is slightly better in both categories, and it's definitely noticeable in the DPM that you can put out. When we come to torpedoes, it's a very clear-cut story. The aaaaand, without a doubt, has the better torpedoes. The aaaaand, in fact, has two sets of torpedoes, both of which I would argue are viable. It's one of the very few ships where the upgrade is not really a clear upgrade, but more of a side grade. Because both of these sets of torpedoes are definitely valid. You have one that is slightly lower cooldown, slightly longer range, but a lot less damage. The other one has a bit longer cooldown, has a lot more damage, actually a ton of damage for an American destroyer, but it also only has 4.5 kilometer range. So I would say both of these sets of torpedoes have their ups and downs, but either way you look at it, it's really just outright better than the Sims' torpedoes. In conclusion, I would say that the Sims, while it does have weaker torpedoes, its really long gun range makes up for that, especially because even a 6.4 kilometer torpedo range is really nothing at Tier 7. And it's lower than your detectability range. You're always going to be visible when you fire your torpedoes, and it's just going to be really hard to actually kill something without getting yourself killed. So those torpedoes will always have to be used with care. The Sims is no exception in this. Same rules as for pretty much all American destroyers apply. However, the Sims, with its long gun range, does have the slight edge, just because both sets of torpedoes really aren't that good. They are okay, they are playable, but they're not amazing in any way, and so they really have to be treated as mediocre either way, and then the Sims just wins out because it has the better gun range, and that really works for it. Now let's take a look at the Yubari, the ship I was most excited for and got most disappointed by. And I'm going to compare it to the Kuma because it's another Tier 4 Japanese cruiser. The Yubari, however, is a light cruiser, which means that it comes with a buttload less HP and armor. It only has 18,000 hit points as compared to the 24,000 hit points of the Kuma, and the Kuma is already a pretty light cruiser. The armor is actually very deceptive. In the hangar, it looks like it has about 57 millimeters of armor, but from testing it, it definitely does not have 57 millimeters of armor. It's more like 20 millimeters all around, and then 57 millimeters in a few places on the Citadel. Maneuverability-wise, the Yubari actually looks really good for a cruiser. But see, the problem is, it is so incredibly light and unarmored for a cruiser that it would actually really benefit from being a heavy destroyer. But it's a light cruiser, which means it doesn't get all the cool bonuses that destroyers get. So being really fast and maneuverable for a cruiser really doesn't mean much, because compared to a destroyer, it's lumbering and slow as shit dripping down a wall. In concealment, the Yubari is definitely much better than the Kuma, but once again, those values are awful for a destroyer, and as such, they're really not anything. They're just somewhere in between, and it doesn't really do much. I mean, you still get detected at 10 kilometers range. That is good for a cruiser, but it really doesn't do anything. Concealment is great for destroyers, where they can actually sneak up really, really close and drop their smoke and be even stealthier and get even closer. But the Yubari doesn't have any of that. It's going to get spotted at 10 kilometers range, and by the time it reaches anyone, it's going to be dead because it has no armor and it's not maneuverable enough. In terms of guns, it looks incredibly bleak. I mean, the Kuma is not known for being the most well-gunned ship ever. You know, guns, that's more of the American cruiser thing. Japanese cruisers are about having torpedoes and having sort of mediocre guns. And the Yubari has even worse guns than mediocre. I mean, the Yubari has 4 guns, right? The Kuma, fully upgraded, has 7. The Kuma has almost double the guns of the Yubari. And on top of that, it has the better rate of fire. So the Kuma has practically double the DPM of the Yubari. And this really, really shows when you fight with the Yubari, because you just don't do enough damage to take anyone out before they just blow you to smithereens. It has the slight upper hand in range, but again, the range isn't anything spectacular, and pretty much every American cruiser has equal or better range, so you're not at an advantage here. And you don't have amazing stealth either, so when you fire at your 12 kilometers range, you are not going to be invisible to the opponent. That's the kind of thing that happens to destroyers when they fire at 12 or 13 kilometers and have like 6 or 7 kilometers detectability range. To you, that doesn't happen. You're always visible when you fire, and you do absolutely no damage whatsoever. I mean, seriously, the damage on the Yubari is pathetic. And then we come to the torpedoes, and it just still doesn't look that good. The only thing that's good about these torpedoes is that they're a bit faster than Japanese torpedoes are on average, and they do a little bit more damage than those on the Kuma. But the reload is 1.5 times as long as it is on the Kuma, the range is shorter, and, most importantly, the Yubari has a tiny, tiny narrow firing arc for its torpedoes. At the back of the ship, it's really difficult to hit anything with the Yubari's torpedoes. I have yet to manage it, actually. I really love Japanese cruisers. I actually prefer them over the American cruisers. I think they're more fun. I like to have the option of, you know, going in close and killing something with torpedoes. I think that's a fun type of gameplay. And as such, the Yubari just seems like it should be really good, but it just isn't. And you might ask, how can this be? How can this ship be worse at pretty much everything? And, you know, not better in anything that matters? What does the Yubari have that actually sets it apart from other ships? Oh yeah, that's right. The Yubari has anti-aircraft. Wow. So the Yubari does 74 DPS with its anti-aircraft. The anti-aircraft only has 3 kilometers range, because, obviously, so it's really hard to actually be in range enough to kill airplanes, but when there are airplanes above you, you do kill them relatively easily. And it is kind of useful to run escort for battleships like the Miyogi and the Kawachi, because they have bad anti-aircraft. But honestly, it's just not enough. The thing with other ships in the game that have really strong anti-aircraft capabilities, like the Gremiachi, for example, like the Cleveland, is that they have other strengths. You know, strengths that by themselves are good enough and make them viable. The Cleveland has great DPM and really, really good guns in general. Great rate of fire and can deal a ton of damage over time. And the anti-aircraft is really just a bonus. The Gremiachi is a good destroyer. It has, again, a good gun range. It can fire at things really far away. It has decent torpedoes. It's good enough as a destroyer. And then on top of that, it has the option of, you know, shooting aircraft down relatively effectively. The Yubari just isn't good at anything. That really is an embarrassment to Japanese cruisers. And while we look at some of the gameplay footage that I came up with for the Sims and the Yubari, let's talk about whether or not I think you should actually get these ships. If you were already planning on spending a bunch of money on gold and premium ships, then yes, getting one of these premium bundles, especially while they're 15% off, is going to be a very, very good idea. You have time till the 13th of April to do so. That is tomorrow, so you should decide quickly. If I had to recommend any of the ships, I would definitely recommend the Sims. Firstly, because there are already American destroyers in the game, and the Sims plays very similarly to these destroyers. So if you enjoy the Samson, Wickes, Clemson, or Nicholas, then the Sims is a good choice, because it plays very much like these ships already. It earns a lot of credits, and if they ever introduce training for commanders on premium ships, then you're already set with an American destroyer for your other American destroyers. My personal favorite is definitely the Gremiachi though. I really do like how it plays, and I'm very excited for how the Russian destroyers could be. If they're anything like the Gremiachi, then I'm really going to super enjoy that line. However, it's a bit more difficult to recommend. While there are already American destroyers in the game that you can try for free and then decide if you like the Sims or not, there are no other Russian destroyers. We have no idea when the Russian ships are going to come into the game, so even if they implemented next patch that you can cross-train your commanders, you couldn't do it with the Gremiachi. So it's kind of hard to recommend. I still think it's a really, really fun ship to play though. If you like the style and if you like the review that I gave, then hey, go ahead and buy one. But I'm not going to highly recommend it. It's going to be more of a neutral thing on the Gremiachi. The Yubari, however, is a absolute and definite no. I would not buy the Yubari. I bought it simply because I wanted to make a YouTube video about all three of these ships. Had I not made a video about it, I would be incredibly disappointed with the Yubari, and I would definitely regret my purchase. I think it's a terrible ship. I bought 5 premium ships yesterday, and the Yubari is definitely the only one out of those 5 that I'm just not excited about. It's not fun to play, it's not really anything, it's just a confused mess. It's somewhere between a cruiser and a destroyer, but it doesn't have the advantages of either one of them. And the fact that it has such amazing anti-aircraft really doesn't do much at tier 4, because the aircraft carriers you can face at tier 4, namely the Langley, Independence and Saipan, aren't amazingly strong. They are good aircraft carriers, but they don't require crazy anti-aircraft like some of the higher level ones do. So I really don't think the Yubari is in a good place, and it's definitely not worth 18 euros. If you really want to buy one of those pre-order bundles, Gremiachi I can see, and the Sims is definitely good. If you're into Japanese ships, you're sadly out of luck. And the only other alternative, in my opinion, is the Kitakami, which itself is so very specialized and at tier 8, so it's also very expensive, meaning it's even harder for me to recommend. And that's all there is to it. Please consider liking and subscribing. If you have any feedback, please leave it down in the comments. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to get better, and I can really only do that with feedback. There's more World of Warships in the pipeline. There's also going to be more Hex and more World of Tanks content, and I'm even thinking about expanding into one of my MMOs that I like. But until then, I have been Eldritch, Master Donkey, and we'll speak again soon.